If you're looking for a video about Avowed being a smashing success, this isn't the video for you. After looking at their first weekend of Steam sales, it is clear that they have not gotten a lot of engagement. Dragon Age Veilguard had more engagement, and sadly, we know how the story ended.
But let's not dwell on unpleasant matters.
It's definitely very concerning when your game doesn't do well, but I see a big difference between these two titles and their teams. You see, Obsidian is already working on Outerworlds 2, and they've gotten the band back together again, the original creators, to make it happen.
Part 2. And like all good sequels, we've included everything that should have been in the first game. More action.
The success or failure of Avowed won't crush them, and I think it's possible that this is the beginning of a golden age for Obsidian. For context, Avowed shipped on February 18th, and most reviewers agree that it's okay. Part of the average rating is due to expectations. Fans of Obsidian wanted and expected more from them. If you haven't played, reviews of the game are critical of the writing, characters, and art style, but generally think the combat is solid. And this is good news because it gives the team something to build on. Here's what Fergus, their studio head, had to say when asked if Avowed would get a sequel.
So I guess there's always a billion things that we're thinking about as it relates to what makes sense next. I mean, even from the standpoint of like we evaluate and we look at, hey, what we know with Avowed is we've created a really, really great action combat system, right? So what else could that apply to that could interest us more or differently?
Keep in mind, this interview was the day after they shipped. They weren't getting a lot of numbers at that point. But even then, he could tell what the strengths were of the game. Also, the way he framed his answer to the question tells me that he's not committed to a sequel. This could be because he's hoping it will do well, or it could be because he's made a few games and knows exactly where it's going to land. My point is that he clearly understands the reality of his game. So why did they ship the game knowing that it probably wasn't going to be a hit? Well, maybe that's because that wasn't the goal. After shipping Gears of War 2, I went to WB Games and we bought Snowblind Studios. They had some very talented people, but they hadn't shipped on a next-gen console. When I started working with them, I asked WB management what they wanted out of Snowblind. What was their expectation for the team? You see, WB was growing really rapidly. They had to learn that making a movie was different than making a game, and they had to think about all these problems that you encounter when you do acquisitions. At the end of that conversation, we had a simple goal. We needed to build a team that could ship a game on a next-gen console, and we had to survive the acquisition storm. And we did. We succeeded in building a team, and we shipped. And many of those team members moved to Shadow of Mordor, which was a hit. That said, War in the North failed financially and critically. It was not a success from that standpoint. Look, no game team starts out aspiring to make an okay game. Developers want to make something critically acclaimed, and they want to stand on the stage and receive all of the applause and industry accolades from their peers. They want to secure financial stability for their team, and then, after it's all over, they want to do it again. They want to make another game. Unfortunately, life happens. Things don't always go well. In fact, they almost never go perfectly in game development. That's just how it works. Even the best dreams can be dashed on the rocks of reality. Here's the thing. Obsidian is delivering. They delivered Avowed, they continue to ship, and being able to ship a game after being acquired by another company is a miracle all on its own. I've been on both sides of the acquisition party, and I can tell you it's tough on both teams. So I applaud the team at Obsidian for shipping. They should feel great about getting Avowed out the door. Also, given the current state of Xbox game studios, you can't take shipping for granted. It's a big deal. Xbox needs games on Game Pass. They have spent billions of dollars acquiring studios and starting up new ones. And you know, many of them are still burning through cash with no ship date in sight. For example, look at the Initiative Studio. They were started in 2018. They've had at least one major reset, and they still haven't shipped. They are located in Santa Monica, which means their costs are extremely high. So even if they do make it out the door, it will be incredibly difficult for them to earn back the money that was spent. It would need to be a monster hit. Then you have Undead Labs. They were acquired in 2018. They doubled in size and added multiple locations. Growth may make sense, but it also adds risk. Trying to work with remote teams and doubling in size is a huge challenge. You have to onboard all the people, they have to learn your culture. By the way, your culture's changing because you were just acquired. Also, from reports in 2022, it sounds like Undead Labs has been struggling with their culture. We'll likely never know exactly what happened, but there were reports of mismanagement, bullying, and concerns from employees that the studio had embraced a patronage culture, that they were hiring only their friends in key positions. I've gone through branding exercises before. Sometimes it can really help to bring the team together, but it takes a lot of time away from making the game. It may end up being the right choice and will speed up their development, but at this point, State of Decay 3 will have to be a massive success in order to make back its money. Those are just two examples of the many struggling studios at Xbox. When I look at that landscape, I would say Obsidian is doing pretty well. They survived acquisition and they shipped a game that is good enough for Game Pass. They also launched Grounded in 2020 and Pentiment in 2022. They know how to ship, and I would argue that it would be worth it for the other studios and Xbox management to take a look at Obsidian and figure out how to replicate what they're doing. Fergus has been making games for years. He's been in the trenches, and he's been at Obsidian since it started. He was one of the founders.
Do you have any questions for Fergus?
How did he like being my QA person on my first game I did ever play?
I like to think Tim was working for me.
He also seems to take accountability for the studio.
Yeah, it's always a hard relationship between developers and publishers, right? Because there's a budget and I don't know, I hate to say what we do is hard because it's our job and it's our job. We're professionals and we need to go make games. And I think I never want to take it off our shoulders that we have responsibility for the state of our games when they came out. Like we signed a contract. I signed a contract that said we would do this game for 9 hamburgers or 17 cheeseburgers or whatever the amount of money that they were. And we at the time felt we could do that. And maybe we ran into trouble or something else happened or staffing, it could be any number of things that caused us to not be able to deliver on time, right?
It's possible that sometime in the development of Avowed, he realized it wasn't going to be a monster hit, and he decided it was time to ship, to learn from the experience and build on it in the future. Without knowing what the goals were for the team, we don't know how Xbox is going to see this, but what we do know is that Obsidian is already working on Outerworlds 2, and they're bringing back the band. They're bringing back Tim and Leonard to work on the game. The key thing for any game is their talent. You need talented people that work well together.
I met Leonard 26 years ago.
What was he like back then?
Pretty much like this. He hasn't aged much. I've aged horribly, and he looks exactly the same.
That is completely untrue.
When you're building a game, you need trust. And you can't just build that kind of relationship overnight. It takes time. Watching interviews with these two is magical because you can see they have a genuine, solid relationship. On top of that, they understand game development. For example, there are a lot of game developers today that think constraints on their design is a bad thing.
Me and Jason designed what the intro was going to be based off our constraints. I know we say this all the time in interviews, but like constraints are really good because they make you be creative.
This team also understands the triangle. They understand that making a game is an exercise in trade-offs.
The time constraints and the budget constraints have been a little challenging. You know, we are always wanting to put more into our games, more reactivity, more content, and we just have to really be cognizant of choices we're making.
And finally, they understand that making games is a long journey of learning.
Probably frightening to PR people for me to even say these words, but we're still learning a lot about how we make games.
You never quite get there. You always think you could do better. And that is one of the keys to being successful. I think Outerworlds 2 has an opportunity to be a big success for Xbox. I hope that it does very well, and I hope that Xbox leadership can see what I'm seeing with Obsidian, that Xbox will take a hard look at their struggling studios and see what they can learn from Obsidian. Making a successful game is building a system and a team, and then iterating on every game you ship. But you can't do that if you're not shipping. Xbox has everything they need to be successful. They have a fantastic portfolio of games. They have a lot of different people working on those games. They're financially or supported. They can dominate the games industry. The only question is if they'll ever figure that out. And maybe, just maybe, Obsidian is the key.